And I love the saying, there's plenty more where that came from the smallest thing. When I met Neil Donald Walsh, he told the story of his dad, and when he was a little boy and the ice cream fell off the cone and he started to cry, his dad said, "Don't worry, mate, there's plenty more where that came from." What a wonderful way to grow up, with people saying things like that, rather than "that's so wasteful," and then straight away you think there's not enough.
Welcome to the Profitable Farmer podcast, where we share stories and tips to help you run a better farming business and create your very own freedom farm. If you're looking to work smarter and not harder in your farm business, welcome. You're in the right place. G'day everyone. Hope you're well. Always love catching up with different members of the Farm Owners Academy team. In particular, Tracy Secombe, our Director of Wellbeing and our head coach at Farm Owners Academy. You'll have enjoyed podcasts with Tracy and I previously, but always great to hear what's going on for Tracy as she connects with and supports so many of our individuals and families across the Farm Owner Academy community. Importantly, in the next week or so, Tracy and I are running a webinar on a really important topic, which is how to understand and overcome burnout. At this time of the year, often many of us are in a peak debt period in the lead up to things like harvest and shearing. We're experiencing dry seasons and the season is coming in early for a lot of people. We're experiencing increased costs. Many have had significant winds, warm weather, frost at a late part of the cropping season in Victoria and South Australia, and many of our South Australians and others have had a really dry season, which brings its own challenges. And so many of us can be feeling fatigue, stress, worry, burnout. So if that's you or if that's someone you know, please be sure to join us for a webinar where Tracy unpacks burnout, how to understand it, how to rate yourself on it, and how to recover from it and get back on your A game. I'll leave details of the webinar in the show notes and how to join. We look forward to seeing you for that session. I want to explore two things with Tracy. The first one is, I think sometimes this whole construct of personal development and this personal growth journey can be misunderstood. And there are elements of it that, I don't know, we might get wrong. And so I want to debunk some of those things. I'm keen for Tracy to explain her perspective on what it is to go on a personal improvement journey. And then the last thing that I wanted to explore is, for those people who think it's bullshit, what Tracy's response to them would be. So a cracking conversation as always. Tracy, thank you again for all you do for our members and our team. To all of you, enjoy this reconnect with Tracy. I hope you find it as much fun and as entertaining and as profound and enjoyable as I do. Enjoy. As always, Tracy, pleasure to have you back on Profitable Farmer. How are you?
I'm great. How are you? Thanks for having me back.
Oh, of course. You're part of I'm not going to say part of the furniture.
No, part of the furniture's fine.
Is that all right?
Yeah, I'll go with that.
We coach around personal development, positive mindset, and I love that it complements the business development, business improvement, and the other stuff that we coach around. What I wanted to explore with you today, Tracy, is I think sometimes it's misunderstood.
Yeah.
And you might disagree, but I've just been reflecting as I listen to some of our clients and their commentary, and I'd love just to check in on a few things and get your perspective on, what is this personal development journey that we're encouraging people to go on. Is that okay?
Great. Perfect.
And really keen in this for you to share, as I know you will, just your reflections of what you're hearing across our incredible community as well. I think sometimes while we're on our personal growth journey, that we think that emotions and feelings are positive or negative, and we give them a label, and we have a negative feeling and we feel like we're almost not allowed to have that because I'm trying to pursue a positive mindset. I think that's a misunderstanding, because what I've learned, and I'll get you to speak to this if I could, is if I'm feeling sad or worried or anxious, it's not about suppressing those and pretending to feel something else. My understanding of personal development journey is to feel those things fully and not label them as negative emotions. What's your comment? Can I just get you to speak to that?
Yeah, I love that question, because you actually can't pretend to feel something else. So you might pretend to the outside world that you're feeling something else. So you might be in front of someone and, put a smile on your face. But ultimately what you feel is what you feel. Like in the moment, you can't pretend to feel something that you don't. But interestingly, a lot of people have been trained to do that, because, you shouldn't share your problems with other people, you should keep it to yourself and, act like you're happy. And a lot of people have taught in the past too, fake it till you make it. And when it comes to emotion, you actually can't fake an emotion. What you feel is what you feel. But there's a few different things that you can do with emotion. And one of the worst things that you can do with your emotion is suppress it, to push it down. And when we push our emotion down, it can actually end up becoming physical. And when my mum had breast cancer, I remember her saying to me that she really believed that her breast cancer lump was resentment. She would never, ever, she avoided conflict, so she would never have a conversation with the person, that she resented. She just sort of buried it and thought about it all the time and held on to it. So suppression of emotion is not the goal. Instead, if you can just become aware of the physical sensation of the emotion, because the other thing that we can do is we can really get in our heads about our emotions. Everybody would have experienced this. So your partner walks into the room and says, "What's wrong?" And you're like, "Nothing," like as if you don't feel something, but people can read it, they know that you're feeling something. So then you feel like you have to justify what you're feeling, and you go into this big story about it. You kind of think, why am I feeling like this? I know, you didn't do the dishes last night, so now you have an argument about that. But sometimes we feel an emotion, we don't even really know why we're feeling it. So in that moment, if you could just become present and take your awareness into your body and actually allow yourself to feel it. Breathe and feel it, and it will pass. We honestly perpetuate the feeling that doesn't feel great by getting in our heads about it. And then when the emotion has moved, then we can, have a different perspective of what's going on. So you absolutely want to feel emotions, and you actually don't have a choice. You're either resisting the emotion, pushing the emotion down, or allowing yourself to feel it.
So when we feel it, actually, can we go back a step? Because I think some of us, probably blokes, and I've heard you say this, Tracy, that when you ask a bloke, an Aussie farmer, perhaps how he feels, he tells you what he's doing. If I'm not feeling great, I think sometimes I feel like blokes are either happy or we're not. We don't have any other feelings than those two things. But how can we actually feel in to that discomfort that we're experiencing, if it's that, and give it an accurate descriptor?
Well, yeah, I guess that's such a good question, because what I'm asking is difficult, because I'm asking for a label for a feeling, and that can be tricky to describe what feeling it is. So you mentioned sad before, but for some people it would just be like, how are you feeling? And if I really press them for a word, they might go, because it's kind of like this yucky feeling that it's very difficult to have a word to describe it. So I think if you don't need a word to describe it, you just know that you don't like it. Like, is it a feeling that you're enjoying, or is it a feeling that you're not enjoying? And so, as to what you were saying, it's either we're happy or it's something else. And so if you're not happy or content or just chilling and it's something else, then rather than trying to find a word for it, it's like, what does this feel like? And, I ask people to take their awareness into their gut, because quite often if you think about your stomach and you're not feeling great, there will be like an uneasiness feeling there, like a churning or a kind of sick feeling in the stomach, a nervousness. For other people, it might be tension. So they might, think about where their shoulders are sitting, like are the shoulders sort of elevated and there's tension in the neck and the shoulders? Are they clenching their fists? Are they clenching their jaw? So sometimes if you actually just recognize how you're experiencing the feeling rather than potentially giving it a label.
And what is the next step? Is it to feel into it and to let it be and to not make it right or wrong? How do you do that?
Well, you allow yourself to feel the emotion just by becoming present with it and just breathing through it. And if you're with another person, the key is to try to feel it in a way that doesn't then result in you projecting it onto the other person. Because quite often people will feel anger, for example, and the easiest way to express anger might be to shout or to get grumpy, demand something or bark at the other person. And don't beat yourself up, because that is a bit of a knee-jerk reaction that we have just practiced. That's all it is. It's just a habit. Often we've modeled it, so we've witnessed it growing up. I grew up with parents that fought. They would yell and scream at each other. So that's kind of was my go-to, because that's what I learned. Other people do the cold shoulder. They just completely shut down. So when they're angry, they will withdraw and you won't get a word out of them, which can be just as infuriating as if you actually, shouted. So I think that what I say to couples is, if you can have some language around this, which is, I'm not feeling great, can we come back to this? I'm going for a run, or I'm going outside, I'm going to punch a punching bag or a pillow, or do some push-ups, or, expend some energy. So there are ways to actually get that energy, which is what emotion is, out of the body without necessarily projecting it onto someone else. And for parents with their kids, this is a question that comes up a lot for me, is now that I know all of this information, once I've yelled at my kids, I feel really guilty for yelling at them, and I say to them, they're never too young for you to turn around and say, I'm sorry that I yelled. My anger is my anger. You did not cause me to feel that way. And I still meant what I said. I want you to put your socks on, but I didn't have to get angry about that. And that's really great, because then we're teaching our kids that we can be aware of our emotion, we can express it, but there are better ways to express it than to be taking it out on somebody else.
What happens if I suppress my emotions? Make them negative, make them wrong, and suppress them.
Well, they are just going to cause the way that you behave in future circumstances. So if we haven't felt an emotion, dealt with it, let it go, then we will continue to react to certain circumstances that will re-trigger that emotion, so that we are feeling exaggerated feelings to small things. The classic example is something that happened in your childhood. So, for example, and I love my parents, like honestly, when I tell a story about my parents, they're both passed. I believe they're both here listening to me and they're okay with it. So here I go, Mum and Dad. But, I was planning for my 18th and I wanted a really good friend of mine to come, and my dad said that her boyfriend couldn't come because the last time he was at our house, he broke our spa. I answered him back. I was like, but they have to come because, it's my friend, and I got a smack for it. And so that taught me that I'm going to get hurt if I don't say what's true for me. So then you can potentially get triggered every time you're in a situation where you don't agree with somebody and you're not speaking up because you've been trained that that can end up in painful consequences. So you're just playing out these emotions. So when I was working on that years later, like I just had to write the letter to Dad, saying what I couldn't say then so that I could get that emotion out and then just stop having to relive it. So that's the problem with suppressing emotions. And that's why, as parents, we don't want to make emotions wrong with our kids. Like, you're not allowed to answer me back. Well, if I can't tell you how I'm feeling and let myself feel it, then what am I supposed to do with this emotion?
Yeah. What'd you do with the letter?
I burnt it. It was not for Dad because it wasn't about him. It wasn't making him wrong. It was just so that I didn't keep feeling those emotions all the time.
And that point, I think, is a really key distinction. It can be so powerful to get your feelings into a journal and onto paper and out, and then let them go. It's not actually about taking it back to the person that triggered you or taking it back into the situation where it came from.
No, exactly. Because of the work I did, I ended up with a wonderful relationship with my dad for the last 5 years between mum dying and him dying because I had dealt with that stuff. But I never talked to him about it. He would have said it was a load of rubbish, and that's fine because, he was 80 by the time he died, and to him it was a load of rubbish. So I just worked on it myself, and we had a fantastic time.
What is this personal development journey? It's not about just thinking positive thoughts and embracing positivity for the sake of it. How do you describe what the personal development or the positive mindset journey is?
Well, it's personal, which means it's completely up to you. You get to choose. So you don't want to just follow people mindlessly and listen to what they're saying and then do it just because they're doing it. You want to ask yourself, where would I like to improve my life? Am I grumpy with the kids? Do I sort of roll out of bed and just go straight to work and then get triggered 10 times a day? What would I like to improve in? Who would I like to be? What would I like to be less of? What would I like to be more of? And for me, I was really grumpy. I was really grumpy and irritable because I was trying to prove my worth by working my butt off all the time and had no balance in my life. So I was irritable and cranky, and I was taking it out on the people I love the most, And so I wanted to become happier. I wanted to be more joyful, more fun to be around, more relaxed. And so I think that's the starting point, is you choosing who do you want to become? What do you want to be more of? What do you want to be less of? And then I think that the personal development journey is actually a letting go process. So I think that a lot of our habits are caused by a thought that we continue to think. When I say the word belief, I think it sounds scary. I think it sounds like I've got this belief and I don't even know what it is and how could I possibly change it? But honestly, a belief is just a thought that you keep thinking. So we have these habits of thinking, and some of them are great and they make us feel good and they cause us to behave in ways that we enjoy and we like who we are when we're behaving that way. And then some of the thoughts that we think make us short with people, or we overreact to things, or we're hypersensitive to things, and we don't like who we're being when we're doing that. So it's just noticing the thoughts that are not bringing out the best in us and noticing the thoughts that do, and practicing to think those thoughts that to behave in a way that we like more often.
Thanks for your comments, Tracy. For me, I met an incredible human, Dig, who is a shamanic spiritual guide. And when I landed and started with FOA about 5 years ago, I asked him to hold space for me and support me to explore how I can be my best self for this important project and team. And I also asked him to support me in turning up and being a better version of me for my wife and my kids and my family. He was quite amazing. Just for 4 or 5 years, I've stopped tracking with Dig recently, but he would just sit with me over the phone and hold space for me and have me feel into that tension in my neck or that that niggle in my shoulder, or that darkness around my heart, or whatever it was. And he would hold space for me and just allow me to feel it. And what was amazing for me was what would come, and the insights and the clarity and the distinctions and the clearings, he would call them, that would come from feeling into the tensions that we have in our body, or the things that don't feel right for us. And for me, my personal development journey has been on the other side of feeling into the discomfort and feeling into the stress and the pressure and the fears and the worries. For me, that's where my growth has happened. It is about, writing in a gratitude journal, and it is about reading positive books, and it is about having, I think, affirmations that can help you be your best self. But for me, that's the personal development journey. It's on the other side of feeling into some of the tension and some of the discomfort. Would you agree?
Yeah. And what's happening when you're doing that is you're accepting it. I think that a lot of our pain comes from resisting what is, and what you resist persists. So, for anybody listening to this, if you just stop and think, what am I resisting right now? What am I pushing against? Because guaranteed it won't go away while you continue to push against it. So whether that's an emotion or whether that's something that's happening in your life, we feel like we've kind of been taught, to fight things. That's how we're going to make it stop. But in fact, if you can just let go and accept what is, because really what is what is. So you actually can't do anything about it right now. It might change in the future, but there needs to be this level of acceptance. And of course, in the farming industry, you know better than anyone that there are things outside of your control, probably more things than most other industries, that you have to, accept, so that you don't rail against it, because it'll drive you mad.
I think it's what I feel really excited about, that farmers, because of the nature of the environment that they operate in, business and personal and environment, that we are so much more open to this than I think we ever have been. But it's awesome, isn't it, to see so many farmers embracing this construct of going on a personal development journey.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm just speaking to so many people who still have the optimism, given one of the most challenging seasons they've had in such a long time.
Yeah. Tracy, you mentioned before feeling triggered by someone or something. The other thing I'd like to explore is, what is that? I know that most of our listeners can relate to, our wives or our husbands or our kids doing something, or a friend or a team member that does something that triggers us. What is that? Why does it happen? And what should we do with it?
Thank you for asking that. So first of all, you're not alone if you feel triggered. And the thing about a trigger is that there is a common thread between the different events that cause the same reaction within you. So, for example, the classic for me was feedback. So, because I was a perfectionist and I always wanted to do things perfectly, if somebody gave me feedback, I instantly took it as criticism. So I was instantly defensive, because I only wanted everybody to think that I was doing a great job all of the time. So that didn't really give me great space for growth, to be open-minded about people saying, this is great, but if you did this, it could potentially be even better. And so it's just recognizing the patterns that we have, where when this kind of event happens, I always react this way. So whether it's defensively, or it's with anger, or you withdraw and get hurt, what is it? What type of emotional trigger is it? And it'll vary from person to person, but journaling is a good way to ask yourself, why do I always get upset under these circumstances? And often you'll find the more important the person is to you, the more you'll be triggered by it. So, for example, somebody that I don't know down the road, might say something to me, and I might be able to shrug it off because I don't know who they are, so it doesn't mean so much to me. But then somebody that I really admire, or I really want them to like me, like a husband, for example, or a parent, then we can be really offended. And because we often are working with people who still work with their parents, I see this all the time. Like, I see grown farmers still trying to prove themselves to their dad, and so they're triggered whenever the dad has some comment, some remark like, have you finished work already? Or something like that,
Totally. Yeah, great example.
And it's just that, those belief systems where they're learning to become freedom farmers, but dad still believes, you've got to work really long hours, for example.
I feel triggered by my father who just made that comment, you finished work already. And it can be something as simple as that, right? You mentioned take yourself away and feel that, maybe do some exercise or something to shake it off. But what is a process to move through a trigger event and arrive back in a more constructive way?
Once you're triggered, you do that, remove yourself from the situation as soon as you can, allow yourself to feel the emotion, and then move into a different perspective. So the perspective could be, my dad is doing the best he knows how. He was also brought up to work those really long hours, and he absolutely believes that that is the only way that you can be successful. And as we were talking before, those long days are required sometimes. But the real work happens away from the trigger. If you can just, particularly if you notice a pattern, I'm always triggered by this, then it's time to ask yourself, why? Why does that upset me so much? Is it because I just wish dad would just love me as I am, for example, without me having to prove myself? And if that's the case, then ask yourself, do I really need to prove myself, or can I just accept who I am and just have my goals and keep working towards them? And then the other thing you can do, I had a wonderful conversation just before this call with a couple where the female is trying to prove herself to her elderly father still. And I said to her, you don't have to prove yourself to your husband, do you? And she said, no. And I said, isn't that fantastic? You haven't attracted a husband that expects you to prove yourself. Look how far you've come. So I think we need to really set ourselves up to win, to realise that even if we're still trying to prove ourselves to someone from the past, potentially we need to look at the people around us who do completely accept us as we are. And that helps us to feel better about it, but also to let go of that white-knuckled hold on this particular person approving of us, because they might not be capable of that because of their own conditioning. No matter what you do, you could turn yourself inside out and they're not going to.
The reality that I can't change anyone, probably especially those people that are closest to me.
Yes, please give up on trying to change somebody else. Personal development is personal development, not husband development or wife development or kid development.
Yeah, and that's probably not going to change your stripes.
No, exactly. I think, I love the definition of love as acceptance. Love is acceptance. If you really love someone, you love them as they are. Now, having said that, if you're in a relationship where there's any kind of abuse, obviously you need to have boundaries around that and you need to be safe. But if you do the work on yourself, then you will develop the skills to improve the relationship, or depending on the circumstances, move on from the relationship.
Thanks, Tracy. So those feelings and emotions that I asked about at the start, if some of them are fearful or are sort of underpinned by that feeling of worrying about something, money, the season, one of the kids or whatever, how do I get some perspective and move through that? Or I just see some people, and especially when we're under pressure like this season and like with some of the economic climate and other things, I think sometimes I see people making decisions from a place of worry and fear, and I don't think necessarily getting themselves the best or the most powerful outcome. So how do people move through fear and worry and then arrive to a space where they're in a strong position to make really courageous decisions?
There are a few different ways of going about it because it will vary depending on the person. So I always say to people, look for the path of least resistance. And what I mean by that is to find what works for you to give you relief. So if you make that the goal, I want to feel better. What would give me some relief? And for me, when it's financial, in the past, what I needed to do was numbers. I needed to do the budget. I needed to have a look at different balances. I needed to get a spreadsheet out and do different models. If we do this, what will happen? If we do that, what would happen? So it really appeased the practical side of my mind to say, okay, there are options. If A plus B equals C, then we'll, get D. So I think if you're that type of person, sometimes that's what you need to do is go down that track. Sometimes you might want to reach out to somebody who is very calm in a crisis, because that can be really impactful to be around their energy, but also to get their opinion. And Greg Johnson comes to mind for me. Greg has done all the research. He knows all the history in terms of the different seasons that have been happening forever in Australia for farmers. And with that past knowledge, it helps to a degree to make predictions about how long something might last and the likelihood, 2 bad years every 10, for example. So when you understand things like that, you can reassure yourself, I'm in that 20% of time, and so, practical things to make yourself feel better. I play the what if game. So when we're worrying, what we're essentially doing is we're playing the what if disaster. And then we go, but what if best case scenario, or what if something in between? What if something fairly neutral? And it just makes us realize that there are other ways to look at this, because when I used to panic and go down the rabbit warren of the worst outcome, my husband, who is naturally optimistic, would say, but what if best outcome, And it was actually really helpful because it would make me laugh to start with, because I'd realise I was being dramatic. But there also can be some gains in going down worst case scenario. And in the case of financial, so it's not always the case, obviously, at the end, we're still alive. It doesn't work, of course, if you have a terminal disease, but if it's about finance, you can say, worst case scenario is we sell the farm, and you're like, okay, that is the worst case scenario. I've faced it. We've said it out loud. Now, what can we do to keep the farm? Sometimes it gives you relief to just go there.
I think all of that just helps us get a bit of fresh perspective.
Yeah, it does. And reaching out to positive people, if I'm ever grumpy, my business partner in our physio company is just makes me laugh. I just ring her and then I'm just giggling my head off and I've forgotten whatever it was that caused me to feel a bit grumpy. So, find those people if you've got them in your life and tap into that energy.
Yeah, and 2 questions that I like to ask myself is this something that I can control? And if it's not, then you can give yourself permission to not worry about that. We've got hay on the ground at the moment. It might rain, but I can't speak to how that's going to end up. So no point worrying. And the other one is this major, medium or minor? And so often we can get worry doesn't discriminate and fears don't discriminate. And so often we can be worried about or fearful of something that is actually a really minor situation, or it will have a minor impact if it does play out as a worst case scenario, nowhere near, the risk of losing a farm or dying, to your examples, Tracy.
Yeah, exactly. And the other thing that I've done in the past too is I've looked back at when I've been worried like this before and reminded myself how it all turned out. It's it all turned out well. I panicked for no reason. So we can remind ourselves of that as well, because there will be farmers out there who have been through this before and things turned around. So that can be reassuring as well.
Yeah, and having those wise people around you, to your point, can just help you navigate challenging times so strongly. The flip side, perhaps, of the similar question is, what keeps us from making courageous decisions when we're under pressure?
Fear. We're afraid of making the wrong decision. And I think that there is a beautiful process to go through, with decision making, and there's a logic side of it. So you absolutely do numbers. You ask intelligent people with the right experience who have been through what you're going through before, what they think, and you get their opinion as well. But then there is what feels good as well. So you play down, let's say you had 3 options. You take yourself down the road of taking option 1, and you ask yourself, how would I feel if I did that and it worked out this way? And then you apply that to each of the other options as well, and choose based on both facts and numbers and what makes sense, and also how it feels, how that scenario feels. And then once you've made the decision, you own the decision and you line up with the decision. So we had a beautiful example of that just recently. I've just come back from a soul pleaser retreat. And one of the women there, who is a farm owner, her and her husband decided to buy another farm. And prior to the decision, I knew that she had some concerns about it because she talked to me about it, but that was the decision. So she asked at the retreat, how do I stop worrying about buying the farm? I said, have you already bought it? And she said, yes. I said, well, then you own it. You own it. You've bought the farm and you own it. So I asked her, tell me all the fantastic things for you, because obviously her husband has all these fantastic things for him that are different. But for you, what are all the brilliant outcomes of this decision that you've made? And she said, we're moving off farm. We're moving into a house that's bigger. I'm going to have a beautiful garden, and I'm having a retreat room in the house. I'm like, happy days. Anyway, her whole demeanor changed for the rest of the retreat. She was so happy about her decision because she changed her point of focus about the decision. And instead of worrying about the increased debt, for example, which they'd done all the numbers on, so they knew that they could afford the debt, she was focusing on the joyful things that were going to happen as a result of that choice.
I love the construct of a contrasting exercise. Like, without darkness, there can't be light, and without up, there's no down, and without left, there's no right. So I think sometimes when we're feeling off or skeptical or pessimistic or whatever it is, doubtful, to write that down and then put a line on the page and write the opposite of that, it can be a really sort of cathartic and healthy process just to help shift perspective.
Yeah, and I honestly think that's the purpose of an emotion that you don't love the feeling of. It is for you to become aware of the emotion and just have clarification of what you would prefer.
Yeah.
And it's the same with the circumstances that you're attributing the emotion to. It's like clarification, yippee. I thought that I wasn't sure whether I didn't want this. Now I'm really sure I don't want this. And this has given me great clarity about what I do want instead. So it's just always flipping the perspective when you can. When you've processed the emotion and you're ready for it, you can't always push yourself to do this straight away. I try to give myself the rule of not taking any action on a significant negative emotion for 4 hours. Like, I'll feel very different about this 24 hours from now. So I'm going to sit with this, and when I'm feeling better, I might take some action on it.
Magic. Thanks, Tracy. So a couple of other personal development constructs that I'd love just to check in on. If I'm feeling negative emotions and I've got fear and worry playing out, and even self-doubt perhaps, it can arrive me, or I'm feeling financial stress, all of those things might arrive me into a scarcity mindset. What we advocate is to have people arrive into a mindset that is abundant. Play life from there. And when you are there, then you can perhaps get into flow and have things beyond your comprehension arrive to you. What's a scarcity mindset, and what can I do to make steps to move towards more of an abundant mindset?
Question. So let's remember that scarcity is not just about money. Often we link scarcity with money, and you can absolutely apply it to money, but you can apply it to everything else as well. So scarcity means not enough. Now, your definition of not enough could be different to my definition of not enough. So it's just recognizing that in this moment, I feel like there's not enough attention, money, whatever it is that's missing, there is not enough. And when we believe in there not being enough, then we believe that we have to compete with others for it. Because if there's not enough, if we believe in the not enoughness concept, then we believe that there's a finite pie, which then causes us to compare, because then we can say that people are greedy, for example, as though the more they have, the less there is left for me. But that is not true. So as we know, we got the perfect evidence that money comes out of thin air during COVID, when most of the developed countries miraculously made billions of more money from nowhere. It's just numbers on a computer. So there is plenty to go around, and that goes with everything. But when we are in a scarcity mindset, we believe there's not enough. When we have an abundant mindset, we believe in plenty. And I love the saying, there's plenty more, where that came from the smallest thing. When I met Neil Donald Walsh, he told the story of his dad, and when he was a little boy and the ice cream fell off the cone and he started to cry, his dad said, "Don't worry, mate, there's plenty more where that came from." What a wonderful way to grow up, with people saying things like that, rather than "that's so wasteful," and then straight away you think there's not enough. And so it can happen through the upbringing, which honestly, if you go back far enough with the generations of where that scarcity mindset came from, it was fair enough. Somewhere along the time, it actually started where there wasn't food on the table.
Totally.
But that is not the case now. We are not there anymore. And yet we haven't let go of that message that's been passed around generation after generation of not having enough. We have an abundance of a lot of things, but sometimes we focus on what we don't have rather than what we do have.
What happens to our reality and in our physiology when we do embrace a mindset of abundance?
Such a sense of freedom. Like when you really believe there's plenty more where that came from, then you can just relax. And when you're relaxed, that's where the ideas come of pivoting, for example, if that's what you need to do in your business. While you're so afraid of losing what you do have and potentially not being able to get more, that can make your brain freeze. Like you're just stuck and you just don't know what to do. You're in panic. And, this is a really real response that was going to save us from tigers in the past. But now we're here still responding that way. So it's just recognizing the physiology of it, but knowing that our mind is very powerful and we can focus on the breath and just do something to relax our physiology, our body, and then it's easier for us to start to think thoughts that feel better. Often we need to go to the physiology first rather than trying to work on the mind. So breath work is really powerful in that situation.
So one other personal development construct, a lot of the high performance narrative that we buy into and that we hear from, say, elite sportsmen and others, is to set a goal and then try and control your environment and your discipline and your actions and everything to go after the attainment of that goal, and that's what the journey's about. Often we find ourselves achieving the goal and not necessarily being any happier. But the other construct, and perhaps one that I've got a bias towards compared to what I just described, is to set an intention and to throw it out into the universe and to trust that if I just stay in motion and be my best self, that the universe will arrive that into my lap. Can you just speak to the difference? And I don't want to make either one of those right or wrong, but I think they're two different philosophies around a personal development journey. And while I've got you, I'd love your perspective on the two.
Well, I love that question because I've done both.
Yeah.
So I definitely ended up in burnout because I went down the first track, which, I enjoyed a lot of aspects of that, where I would set a lofty goal and then I would work out a plan and roll up my sleeves and just go for it, And that worked for me for a really long time, particularly when I was single and didn't have children, because my whole life was about me. So, I had the luxury of setting those targets and just going for them. And I was still able to just get into bed and sleep all night because I didn't have a baby to wake up to or anything like that. But I think quite often we can see the change when we think our life can continue that way when we have children, for example, a relationship and children. And then we're trying to juggle all of it. And then we learn the hard way that it gets out of control. So I think you can achieve goals both ways. But the second way is so much easier. And the big caveat that I tell people all the time is, now that I do it the easy way, which is what you've described, where I just think, wouldn't that be nice? And then I forget about it, knowing that I will arrive there somehow. And I'm just excited to kind of see how, I just think that's the fun bit, is rather than me nutting out the how, a much better how will show up that I could not have thought of myself. I love that. But I don't just sit around and do nothing. Enjoy taking action. So I take action that I enjoy. And if I receive an idea or an impulse, I'll give you an example. So at the retreat recently, I have the retreat very loosely planned, very, very loosely. Because what I find is that once I'm at the retreat, there will be somebody in that retreat that needs something that's going to help them shift. And I will receive an impulse to do something that will be just what they needed. So I had this idea just before I went to sleep one night at the retreat, and I woke up and to myself, okay, we will do that this morning. And so I got everybody to spend about a minute looking into each other's eyes, pairing up and saying to each other, I see you, and then giving each other a very meaningful hug. And there was one lady, they all loved it, but there was one lady, and that's exactly what she needed. Like, it completely shifted everything for her, and she plans to go back and start doing that with her partner. So I love that. I love that. But if we are just completely in our heads, I've got this whole plan and I'm not going to veer left or right from it, we're missing out on this opportunity of these impulses that will exceed your expectations, because you couldn't have made it up yourself if you tried. They will both work. Both methods need action. You rarely just sit in the corner meditating and it all just falls into your lap. Most of it is going to happen by you, even if it just means being in the right place at the right time, like showing up where your future husband or wife is going to be and you're going to meet them, so it's just following them and then just reveling in how things play out. It's so fun.
Yeah, and the universe can provide in ways that are just completely beyond your comprehension if you trust it and allow for that to play out. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, an example for us, I think, Tracy, is I've set an intention that we do want to head over to WA and make more of an impact in WA and New Zealand as a business and as a company. And just threw that out there, and some amazing conversations are starting to play out for us with other companies that might help us, and other great community groups that are helping us or keen to help us do that. And I could have tried to manufacture that and control that and force that a little bit, but to throw it out there and then just trust that the right people are going to arrive at the right time that will see that outcome play out. It's just a wonderful way to play life and business.
It's so good. And I hear stories like that all the time. One of the farmers, she wanted to start doing some coaching and she didn't have a clue, where to start. And she's done the courses and things. And then she thought she might get a part-time job. And in fact, she didn't even think of that. Somebody suggested, someone's looking for that. She thought, I don't really want to do that. But she went in there. And when she was in there for this part-time job, the lady said, I've got a room that you can consult in with your coaching. She's like, oh my goodness, that's why I've ended up here talking to you. Yeah, and she knew not to push it because of the training she's done, just to trust that things will fall into place.
Perfect, Tracy. So for people that they've been considering a personal development journey, but they might not have made much of a first step, but they might be feeling like they are feeling some emotions that are uncomfortable. They are feeling some worry and some doubt, perhaps about the current season or about pressure from whatever. They might have identified that maybe they do have a bit of a scarcity mindset that needs some work. What would be your tip for them on how they can meaningfully lean in to a personal development journey?
You could start by doing some things on your own, or you could reach out and get some support from somebody who you trust and you resonates with you. If you were starting out on your own, for me, I started to give myself space. That's what I needed. So my breakdown came from working from the moment I woke up to the moment I went to sleep. And I was talking to a guy, one of our members, a couple of weeks ago. When I was talking to him, I asked him what his typical day looked like. And he said that he woke up in the morning, he went to work. It was like 5:30 a.m., got home at 6:30 p.m., ate dinner, and then went to bed. And I asked him how old his children were, and he said 3 children aged 3 to 5. And he started to cry. And he realised himself that he was missing out on his kids growing up because he was working all the time. And so I said to him, what is one thing that you could realistically commit to change? And he said, I'm going to go and watch their sport on Saturday instead of working. One change, but life-changing. And that will progress to another change because of the experience that he will have. Not only him enjoying watching the kids, but how the kids will respond to him being there. Yeah. And then that will take him to the next step. So I think it takes some introspection where you can actually look at your life and just say, is it the life that I really want to live? Like, will I be happy with this on my deathbed? What will I look back and regret? And that will give you the clue of the first thing to change, and make it small. Honestly, where people fall down with personal development is they try to do everything at once and you will not continue it. You can only change one habit at a time. So make it small, make it achievable, set yourself up to win and make that small change.
I think we're wired as humans when we're not feeling right to look for the wholesale major change. But I do love the construct that it's just little 1%ers that if you implement one at a time, they compound, don't they?
Absolutely. Like everything I do now, I have just introduced the things one at a time. 3 months down the track, when they're an embedded habit, I might introduce something new. I never rush it. It's just one thing at a time.
I do have one more question for you that's just come up for me, Tracy, is what would you say to the person who thinks that personal development's a load of bullshit?
You're doing it whether you think you're doing it or not. Like personal development is the game. Like we're all here developing ourselves. We might be developing ourselves in a way that is optimal or not. So we're all developing habits. We're all developing, our persona through the choices that we make. So you're either doing it on autopilot or you're doing it consciously. So there is no need for personal development if your life is what you would call perfect. Soldier on. But if there is anything you'd like to change, then there is ways to be able to improve that.
Just to wrap up, what are you seeing across our FOA team and community on what we've spoke of when you get to connect with our members?
Oh, I'm seeing so many wonderful things. So first of all, I'm seeing vulnerability. And vulnerability is the start of change. You cannot change if you can't be honest with yourself and then take that step to say it out loud. There is so much power in that. So I'm seeing great vulnerability, and then there's relief because people are vulnerable, because they are heard and seen and understood, and they're not the only ones. And so that's so powerful in itself. I'm also seeing great resilience, and resilience is acknowledging the emotion, allowing yourself to feel it, and then looking to reach for some relief and working your way towards hopefulness or optimism, and then applying, all the tools that they have to be able to look at the numbers so that they can make the most of potentially their worst year, but very optimistic about what's coming. The other thing I'm seeing is community, absolute support, so much support, both on the Soul Pleaser retreat and within our Farm Owners Academy community, just genuine empathy and understanding and support and compassion. And for anybody out there who is feeling alone, I really implore that you reach out to somebody. Do not be proud so that you cannot speak the truth about what you're experiencing at the moment, because you can't change something that you haven't said out loud, even if it's to, your partner.
Tracy, we've got a webinar coming up. Would you mind speaking to that? I think it's right on point with what we're touching on today.
Yes, we have a webinar coming up. Hutch and I will be doing it on burnout, speaking about the different stages of burnout. I think a lot of people get relief when they go through the stages and understand where they're at, and then you're empowered to do something about it. We have a wonderful member of ours who shares her story. I think it's the best way to learn about not only what it's like to be in burnout, but also what you can do about it. And so we use that case study. And then I'm going to go through what you can do about burnout. So the steps to get you from wherever you are back into the first phase, which is the honeymoon phase, very much like a relationship when we first meet and everything's rosy. We can really apply that to our job or our business as well, and bringing yourself back to that phase. And then you've got the tools when you start to notice yourself slipping back into those, more burnout phases, of how you can bring yourself back to feeling good again.
Can't wait for that one, Tracy. I'll include the details of that webinar in the show notes. Hey, Tracy, it's always great to have you on Profitable Farmer. And again, thank you so much for all you do for our team and our community.
Oh, thanks, Jeremy. You're welcome. It was absolutely my pleasure.
And there you have it, ladies and gents. Fascinating to get Tracy's spin on what it is to go about personal development. Some of those constructs that we might misunderstand about it. I hope you found that interesting and insightful. I loved her comment at the end there on what she would say to someone who thinks this whole personal development journey is BS. So for me, a very healthy reminder that I can't change anyone. And there's really no point being frustrated by other people. If I am triggered or frustrated by other people, there's an opportunity for me to self-reflect around that and look into that. And also, the only person that I can change is me and how I turn up. For things to change, first I must change, is one of my favourite quotes by Jim Rohn. Another one by the great Jim Rohn is, work harder on myself than I do on my job. And the last one, I think by Henry Ford, is, never wish your life were easier, wish that you were better. 3 favourite quotes that come up for me on the back of what Tracy shared. But this whole personal development journey, it is a wonderful exploration in my experience. And as Tracy said, it's the point of business and life, is to put ourselves in tough and challenging situations and then resolve to rise to the occasion and to learn about how we can improve as individuals and humans for the journey. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that. Great fun to catch up with Tracy. Thank you. Hope you're all incredibly well wherever you are. Look forward to checking in again shortly. See you on our burnout webinar in coming weeks. Until then, take care and bye for now. Thanks for listening to another episode of the Profitable Farmer podcast by Farm Owners Academy. If you're new to this show, be sure to follow us. If you've been a long-time listener, let your friends know about us, or come continue the conversation in the Profitable Farmer Facebook group. All the best as you grow your business and create your freedom farm. Until next time, keep being incredible.